Welcome to week 4. The assignment for this week is a continuation of what we built last week. In addition to allowing the user to view their Twitter timeline, we'd like them to be able to compose and publish a new tweet. You can look at some of the mockups here. We're going to be adding a new icon to the top right of the application. Tapping on the icon will lead them to a new screen or new activity where they'll have the option to write the tweet and then actually publish it. And here you can see an example of a really polished application. You can see in the screenshot here, you have the user avatar with rounded corners. You have a UI that looks pretty similar to Twitter, and you have the ability to actually reply to a tweet. And here you can see a kind of a GIF walkthrough of what this might look like with some of the optional features done. So the requirements are a user can compose a new tweet by using a compose icon in the app bar. A user can enter a new tweet and publish this to Twitter. And importantly, once they've published the tweet, we should take the user back to the home timeline, and the new tweet should be visible. The way we'll do that is by manually inserting this new tweet into the timeline rather than relying on a full refresh. So we won't be making an API call to Twitter once the user has published. We'll manually insert that new tweet into the timeline. Finally, while the user is composing a tweet, they should be able to see a character count with characters remaining for a tweet out of 140. So the assumption here is that the number of characters is limited at 140. And similar to last week, there are a lot of really great stretch stories that you should take a look at once you're done with the required. So what I have running here is the application as we had built it last week. You have a list of 25 tweets that you can view. What we'd like to do as a first step is in the top right of the app bar, we want to show an icon similar to as you can see in the mockup here. The way we'll do that is by opening up this guide for the action bar. The action bar or the app bar is a consistent navigation element that is commonly used in almost every Android application. The action bar is important to keep in mind as you develop apps because it gives the user a sense of where they are in your application. For example, the app bar can be used to show upward navigation to the logical parent. You can imagine we have a list of tweets, and tapping on one of them goes into the detail view of that tweet, where you can see things like the number of retweets or replies and so on. And then app bar can be used to go back to the parent activity, which is the list of tweets, and that gives the user a sense of the relationship between the detail view and the list view. Another example of a use case could be an application or activity-specific title, and then primary action items for an activity. And that's what we'll be doing. We'll be showing a compose icon in the activity. The way Android allows the developer to place action items in the app bar is through a menu system that's defined in XML. So if you scroll down in the guide to the section for adding action items, you can read more about how this is done. There's a method called onCreateOptionsMenu. We'll be overriding this method and providing a menu XML file which will dictate how the activity displays options in the app bar. So let's open up Android Studio and open up the resources folder, and there should be a directory called menu where you'll have already from the starter project a menu called login.xml. We can ignore that one and let's just create a new menu resource file called menu main. If you go into text tab, you can see a little bit more. All this is an empty menu, and what we're going to do is drag in a menu item. By default, when you drag in a menu item, it shows up in the overflow menu, which we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. But before we do that, I just wanted to show you, by default, the menu shows up as these 3 dots, which is the option for showing all the menu options. So just to make that a bit more clear, because it's a little bit hard to see right now, just temporarily, I'm going to change the theme to just be theme app compat light. Now you can see it a bit clearer what this looks like. But basically, when the user taps on these 3 dots, that opens up the whole menu. There are 2 places where a menu item could appear. One is as an icon in the app bar, and second, in the overflow menu. What we want, going back to the course portal, is we'd like the compose icon to always show up as an action in the app bar rather than in this overflow menu. And if there is nothing in the overflow menu, then it won't even show up. So let's do some quick edits here. We'll call this compose, even though the title should generally not even be shown because it'll always show up as an icon. We'll give it an ID of compose as well. For icon, there are some built-in icons in the Android system, so we'll just utilize one of those. If you start searching for IC menu edit, you should be able to see it. And then this is show as action is the important attribute here. If you open that up, you'll have a couple of different options. This dictates how we want to show menu action item in the app bar. Always means we always want to show it in the app bar and never in the overflow menu. Never means we never want to show it as an icon, and it should always show up only in the overflow menu when you tap on the 3 dots. If room means that it depends on how much screen real estate you have. If your phone is large enough to display it as an icon, it will. Otherwise, it'll show up in the overflow menu. So, and with text means you want to show both. And so there are a few other options, but what we care about is we want it to always show up as an icon. So hit always and hit apply. Now you can see that we have this pencil icon which shows up, which is what we're looking for. And so let's just revert the change in the styles.xml. Great, and so now let's go back to timeline activity. And like we talked about, what we want to do is we want to override a certain method, which is called onCreateOptionsMenu. And so Android Studio will actually help us out with this. If you tap Control O, you have all the options of different methods you can override. So we'll say onCreateOptionsMenu. And what we want to do is get the menu inflator and inflate the menu that we just defined. So I'm going to copy over this comment just so it's a bit clearer. And we'll say get menu inflator, inflate, and then provide the menu resource file. And then the second parameter is the menu which is passed in. This method returns a Boolean, and it's not obvious what the Boolean actually represents. So if you go into the base method in the activity.java file, you can read the documentation about what this means. So the return value, you must return true for the menu to be displayed. So that makes our choice pretty clear what we want this to be. Let's just make this return true. And now the next question, of course, is we want to be notified when the user taps on one of the menu items. So if we go back to the guide, there are 2 options for how to handle action bar clicks. The first is you can use Android onClick in the menu XML. And the second approach, which is my preference, is to use the onOptionsItemSelected method in your Java code. So the menu item that's tapped is passed into this method, and then you can check the ID of this menu item and compare that to the one you care about to handle it appropriately. So we'll do the same trick where we'll override a method with onOptionsItemSelected, and we're passed in the menu item. And so what we want to do is check if this menu item is equal to the compose ID that we defined earlier. At this point, this means the compose icon is tapped. And we'd like to navigate to the compose activity, this new activity that we'll define. But before that, let's just do a proof of concept and run our application. Let's just show a toast when we tap on this. And the toast will simply say compose. And for now, we'll return true, because this method also returns a Boolean. We can read more about what this Boolean represents. So return false to allow normal menu processing to proceed, true to consume it here. We want to consume the tap of this menu item here, so we'll return true. So let's run it now. We'll run the application. And what we expect to see is this icon show up. And when you tap on it, you see this toast, which says compose.